Hello and welcome to Meet the Writers. I'm Georgina Godwin. My guest today is an international best-selling author, journalist and editor. Born in Incheon, Korea, she was raised in Portland from the age of 9 and she received a degree in art and archaeology from Princeton University. She founded and was editor of Peaceful Dumpling, an online magazine covering sustainable lifestyle and literature. Her first novel, Beasts of a Little Land, was a finalist for the Dayton Peace Prize and won a prestigious Russian award. Her latest novel is City of Nightbirds. It's set in the world of ballet, and it was chosen for Reese Witherspoon's book club, and I'm sure is going to go on to many, many other wonderful book clubs and to win awards because it is fabulous. Juhea Kim, welcome to Meet the Writers.
Thank you so much, Georgina. Very happy to be here.
So I just have to tell the listeners what happened when we met a few minutes ago. I came in and I was just listening to your book on audio, and I came in and you were early, and unfortunately you saw that I was in fact crying. So all I can say is I can see the passion that you have poured into this book because it drips off the page and down my face.
Oh, Georgina, I mean, hearing that it's going to make me cry. Thank you so much, because I did pour my heart and soul into this book, and to see readers connect with it in such a genuine way is the only reward that I could have.
Yeah. Well, we'll get onto the book specifically a little bit later, but I want to find out more about you. Tell me about growing up in Korea.
Well, I was born in Incheon, and I had a very close-knit family, very loving family. My father, my mother, my older sister, and I was especially close to my grandfather, my paternal grandfather. This City of Nightbirds is actually dedicated to his memory. And he passed away when I was in second grade, quite early on. I didn't realize that this book would be a way of getting to know him better or connecting to his memory. It was completely unintentional. But I did know, even at an early age, that my grandfather was incredibly sophisticated. He spoke 5 languages: Korean, Japanese, English, French, and Chinese. And he was very cultured. I didn't get to know other things about him very much. But when I was deep into writing this book, my aunt, his oldest daughter, came to visit us. And very, very offhand, she told me a story about how he used to love listening to Maria Callas. And he had some LP records, and his favorite was Maria Callas, of course. But he also loved Grieg, some of these opera pieces that I personally adore. And I'm not a huge opera aficionado, but the songs that she specifically mentioned just happened to be my favorite opera arias. And I was just so blown away by that. She mentioned Carmen, and I said, Carmen is my favorite opera. And I was already writing this book at that time. I think I even wrote in Maria Callas at that point when I found this out. So there is a part, without going into spoilers, there's a part where the protagonist discovers some old LPs and, she goes through her mother's things. And that part was inspired by the story of my grandfather.
But before writing, of course, you were a dancer and a musician.
I grew up learning ballet since the age of 9. And actually, also at age of 9, I started playing the cello. And classical music and ballet have been my lifelong passions ever since. And this book, City of Nightbirds, is really one of the ways that I have channeled this obsession into. And I probably would not have become a writer without also loving these different art forms, because more than other kinds of writing, I'm often inspired by dance or music.
So you were this very, very musical, talented child and also a dancer, but then you gave up dance. Why was that?
Well, to be honest with you, I think that I have the perfect temperament to be a ballet dancer, but I don't have the talent for it. And, that was very clear. In order to be a dancer, you are required to have a specific body and you develop very early. Dancers hit their peak very early in their career, much more so than writers. So even though I had all that passion for it, I knew that I wasn't ever going to make it as a professional dancer. However, I discovered that I was a storyteller actually through dance, because the first time I understood that I could do something like this was in university. One of the favorite courses I took at Princeton was modern dance and choreography. And as a part of that course, I was required to choreograph a solo. And I created this solo on me, and I knew that there was a moment where I wanted the audience to feel something very, very painful, because I was going through a lot of love affairs and broken hearts, early 20s. And when the performance day came, all these friends came, other students came, and I performed a piece set to music from the film Frida. And at that one moment, one climactic moment, I performed a gesture and everybody in the audience gasped. And this wasn't to do with, a lot of amazing feats of bravura that you read in City of Nightbirds. This was because it was a story that I was telling with my body. And I could see how I could move people through my stories. And I discovered that potential not by writing, but by dance.
That's extraordinary. So then you went on to work in publishing, and I wonder if that gave you insight into how the whole writing world works.
Absolutely. So I was very starry-eyed and I loved reading. I thought about books a lot and I thought, why not try this? And I happened to see a notice for an editorial assistant at Knopf, which is an imprint of Penguin Random House. And it was a really tough place to work in. I will say that even within the world of publishing, it was a very old-fashioned place, and with it comes a lot of damaging practices. However, I did get to learn a lot about what makes good writing and what goes inside the making of a book. And without having worked there, I would not have met my agent, Jody Khan, which eventually led to the publishing of my first book. So I think everything happens for a reason.
Now let's talk about your first book, because it was a huge hit. It's called Beasts of a Little Land, and it was set in Korea. Tell us more.
Beasts of a Little Land is an epic story of love, war, and redemption set against the backdrop of the Korean independence movement. And it spans a half century, following a cast of 2 generations of characters as they meet, fall in love, and betray one another, and ultimately determine the fate of their new nation.
And this set in Korea, but a Korea that you hadn't lived in for years.
That's right. I frequently get asked by my Korean readers, how were you able to capture Korean history, the Korean nature, environment, just basically the soul and spirit of our people and the nation? And I feel quite shy because I actually grew up in America and I didn't go back to Korea for 20 years. But I was able to draw from my early memories and my love of Korean literature. So everything that I describe, it's either from very early memories or from reading Korean novels or poetry from the early 20th century. And that's exactly the same kind of process that went into my second novel, which is set in Russia, and which I wrote before I actually first visited Russia.
Mm-hmm. And I've heard you talk about this book, and you say that the idea for it just arrived. It was kind of fully formed. Mm-hmm. Tell me more.
Georgina, strangely, this is how each of my books have come to me, but I will describe how Beasts of a Little Land first came to me. At that time, I was living in New York, and I was very poor and just barely surviving by doing freelance and living in Inwood neighborhood of North Manhattan. I had just begun working with my literary agent, Jody. I asked her, I would love to publish my short story collection so I can have something to live on. And she told me, Juhea, I really care about you. I care about your career. But we can't go out with a book of short stories. No one's going to read that, and you will never be able to publish another book. Start writing a novel from today. I was devastated because I didn't know how I was going to pay next month's rent. And I went running in the park, Fort Tryon Park. It was a snowy day, and while I was running, I suddenly felt so much calmer and happier. And at that moment, this image of a hunter lost in the woods came into my mind. And I also could see this image of a tiger. It was as though the tiger leapt into my imagination. And I could see all of these penultimate images from the later chapters of the book came as well. And I ran straight home, sat down in front of my laptop, and wrote about 20 pages, what would eventually become the prologue of my first novel in one sitting. The book would go on to have many changes and feedback from various parties, my agent, my editor, copy editors, but nobody wanted to touch the parts that were inspired by that first day. So what readers pick up and open the book and read in the prologue is nearly the same as that first chapter that I wrote.
That's extraordinary. The book did incredibly well. You won lots of prizes with it. You gave the prize money away. Tell me why.
So that is the Yasnaya Polyana Literary Award, which is administered by the Leo Tolstoy Museum Estate. I was especially honored by this prize because Leo Tolstoy is the single biggest literary influence in my life. And as well as personally, because, he was a humanitarian before his time, vegetarian, had a huge respect for the dignity of all beings. And I think that's very important. Pacifist. When they told me that I had received this award for Beasts of a Little Land, I immediately knew that it would be contributed towards the conservation of wild tigers and Amur leopards. I have been involved with tiger and leopard conservation since before the book was published in late 2021. Honestly, I became an author in order to do good in the world. And I hope that doesn't sound insincere or cliche, but I walked through a lot of difficult roads in order to get here and faced a lot of rejections, which is quite normal in order to become an author. And one day, after I had been struggling for some time, I asked myself, why am I trying to write? And I created a mission statement, which was that my purpose in life is to use my talent for writing to save nature and reduce animal suffering. And it clarified a lot of things for me. I was no longer writing in order to see my name on the cover of a book, but anything that I wrote would be in service of a greater good, and I felt so free and so much more confident. I could even tell people what I was working on because it was no longer about my ego. So I already knew, probably since that first day when I started writing, that this book, Inspired by a Tiger, would go towards helping wild Siberian tigers and Amur leopards. These two animals have such spiritual importance to the Korean people. These species used to flourish in the Korean peninsula, but they have been extirpated for about a century. The tigers, because of the Japanese occupation, and the leopards, which barely survived the occupation, disappeared permanently after the Korean War. So the main cause of their extirpation in Korea is man-made conflicts. And I knew that I wanted to play a role in bringing them back. Specifically now, at this point in our political juncture, I want to help make sure that they don't disappear completely because of our current political conflicts. It's actually incredibly interesting because tigers remain about 500 individuals in the wild, and there are about 100 individuals of the Amur leopard, which is the most endangered big cat in the world. And they only live in China, Russia, and North Korea, three of the most inaccessible countries. Because of their habitats that are fractured amongst industrial areas, if we don't cooperate now in order to create an ecological corridor, they will be functionally extinct very soon. So actually, quite a bit of my work hours are dedicated to liaising between scientists and conservationists in order to make sure that they continue this work. And the Yasnaya Pollyanna Literary Award prize money was really great because I could funnel that to the Land of the Leopard National Park, which is where most of these leopards currently remain.
That's a fabulous story. Now, let's move on to City of Nightbirds. I am longing to discuss this book with you. You say that this one also came to you with a sort of flash of inspiration.
It did. It didn't have the same dramatic tiger image. That's such a good story. It's almost like I made it up. City of Nightbirds did not have the similar image, but I do remember that it primarily came on a walk. Again, very similar. I remember it was a spring day in Portland. I was walking amongst gardens in the neighborhood and, smelling roses. And I knew pretty early on how all the dots will connect. And it's how my brain works. I knew all the characters. I knew what would happen, the beginning, middle, and the end. And within a day or two, the whole novel was inside my head. So the rest of the time, which took about a year and a half to write, I was just filling out what I knew would happen. This was such a beautiful process. The process of writing Beasts of a Little Land was very arduous because of the place in life that I was in. But writing City of Nightbirds was completely the opposite, where I was immersed in beauty. I was writing about ballet. I was doing ballet, practicing it.
You came back to ballet?
Yes. So this was during the pandemic. So with all the ballet classes that people were offering online, I was able to come back to it very easily. So I was doing ballet, I was watching it, on video or sometimes live as those came back, and listening to music. So this whole creative process was a seamless aesthetic immersion that I felt really lucky to experience.
The book has lots of huge themes in it, but really at the heart of it is art. What is art? Why make art?
Yes, exactly. It is such a big question, right? And from the beginning, I saw this as a love story between an artist and her art. And it really is my love letter to art, because that has been my lifelong obsession of all kinds. I've been in love with music, ballet, with visual arts, and of course literature. And this is something that gives me meaning, and I wanted to share that.
And this is a thing, Natasha, who's our main protagonist, who's a prima ballerina in a Russian company in St. Petersburg. This is something that she thinks about a lot. At one point, because she's quite mentally unstable at points in the book, at one point she says that a part of her becomes art and she loses a part of herself. And that kind of sends her into a bit of a fugue. I would have thought that would have enervated her, but it didn't. When art becomes her, it slows her down. Why is that?
I don't think it's a spoiler to say that this is heavily autobiographical, at least this part. And I'm not saying that I'm a Russian prima ballerina, but a lot of the reflections come directly from my inner experience. And that part I wrote thinking about what happened to me after the publication of my first novel. And the process is ongoing also for City of Nightbirds, and how it's lodged itself into me and made me lose a little bit of humanity. And this is all very true. I hope this doesn't surprise people when I say that today is my 23rd consecutive day of work without any time off. And I'm used to working 7 days a week, but working 10 to 12-hour days of deep mental focus without even one day, weekend or day off, that is also quite exhausting for me as well. But this is a part of what I have to do for my art. When you live this way, sacrificing your personal needs, your preferences, everything is deprioritized in service of art. And if you live this way for a while, you do start to feel less human, which is ironic because you need a lot of humanity in order to create art. In fact, art is basically a manifestation of your humanity. That's all it is. And which is why if there is no humanity behind it, it's just design or something beautiful, but that's not going to be art. There has to come a point where you replenish yourself and return to humanity again in order to be able to create again. But it comes and goes in waves, and I'm at that stage where it's requiring a lot of me.
Is it ever worth it? Is art worth it? And when you look around at the terrible state that the world is in, how can you balance the importance of art against the awful times that some people are going through?
I think that is exactly the question that Natasha asks in the book and why I wrote the book, because I personally have grappled with it so much. I mentioned earlier that I became an artist in order to be able to do good in the world. As someone like that, I felt very disillusioned with what I'm doing while the world is burning and there is so much suffering and injustice, and the direct impact that I can have is only so big. But ultimately, Natasha finds an answer that allows her to live and to create beauty, also maintain her conscience. I have also found some way to do that as well. Part of it was writing this novel that made me okay with it. Of course, another part of it is my active advocacy and how much of my book I am pouring into advocacy directly. I don't mean just financially. A lot of it is about my time and energy. I think I measure my success by how many hours I devote to advocacy as opposed to just my personal success or art. I had an interesting experience. Some months ago, Gustavo Dudamel, who is the incoming maestro at the New York Philharmonic, and he was a longtime maestro at the LA Phil, he came to conduct Mahler's Symphony No. 3 here in London, and I went to hear it. And I am a total Mahler novice, as a matter of fact, but I went like a blank page. I absolutely was devastated by its beauty. It moves you. Beauty is such a thing that you recognize it. That's what distinguishes true art. You have to be able to recognize it. And on the way home, I was thinking about the fact that I was sitting in this beautiful concert hall listening to Mahler 3, while again, there is so much suffering, and there's a part of me that thinks what luxury that is. At the same time, it is so silly. I hope Monocle listeners don't think I'm a silly person, but at the same time, I was on the tube and I saw this fly that was trapped in the glass case of the tube light. And I felt so sorry for that fly because I am somebody who gets to experience the celestial divine music, and I have the freedom. And there are beings in the world that don't experience beauty, that don't have freedom. And I honestly teared up a little bit, probably because I was in such an emotionally heightened state. But then I realized something about that. Beauty isn't something that opposes love or takes away from it. Beauty is love. So by being an artist in service of beauty, hopefully I get to also have a part in opening people's hearts.
That's beautifully said. Your dancers suffer a lot of physical pain as well as emotional pain. And you write brilliantly about it, about being on point and toes bleeding and we examine the whole sort of ballet mistress, ballet teacher, student relationship. There's a very particular dynamic within Russian companies, isn't there? How did you get into that?
Well, I grew up learning all forms of ballet, but I connected the most with the Vaganova method, which is the Russian school. And I love everything about it. Aesthetically, or as somebody who dances that style, I love that feeling of wholeness that it gives you, because the Russian ballet school is all about the port de bras. So your upper body, your neck, your shoulders, your arms have to all be completely integrated to what your legs are doing, which creates a completely different effect both as a viewer and as a dancer. Of course, I also connect very deeply with that teacher-student relationship that's very special to the Russian school. And I even have a teacher like that here in London. She's Georgian. Of course, the Georgian school is related to the Russian ballet school, Vaganova method. And the way she just watches me and allows me to dance my best, pushes me, but with this like aloofness, but also warmth. It's very moving. How I was able to put all of that into the book. Some of it is research, but so much of it is also organic because throughout the years of training, you hear stories from the teachers and you'll remember them and you'll write these down. A wonderful one that I acquired that didn't even make it into the book is one I got from Xander Parrish. He is a former principal at the Mariinsky Theater. And since the war, he left and went to the Norwegian National Ballet. And he's Royal Ballet trained, so he's English. Xander, whilst teaching a class, Xander told us that he received a very good jumping tip from Leonid Sarafinov, who is a star dancer, one of the premier danseurs nobles of the Russian school. And this was earlier on in Xander's foray into Mariinsky, and probably he was at the corps at that point, they were doing a tour of La Bayadère. Leonid saw Xander practicing entrechassis on stage and pulled him aside and said, "Stop trying to jump so high. Just get your feet off the ground and get all the beats in." But it was about don't try to jump so hard and high, focus on the precision. And I loved that story because I'm not a professional dancer, but through Xander, I somehow have this connection to one of the legendary premiers of our time, and so on and so forth. There is this connection, probably traces back to Marius Petipa. So I love being a part of that tradition.
And I mean, you describe it all so well. I mean, I'm not a person that's particularly interested in ballet, but I'm absolutely drawn in by it. I mean, I don't think you have to have any knowledge or skill to really enjoy the book. The book is very visual. I particularly like your descriptions of sky and of water. And you never repeat yourself. There's so much sky, there's so much water, but it's different all of the time. And I wondered about that process.
Georgina, I have to compliment you on your close reading. You're very astute because I know as a writer, that is my thing. Every writer has their thing that really they come back to. It's their obsession. It's their point of departure. And each person, it's different. But for me, it's the weather. It's the color of the sky, color of the water. If I know what the weather was like at that point in time, I can write the rest of the scene easily. So the first thing I think about is what was the color of the sky? What was the sunlight? Dostoevsky has that thing, and his is the long slanting afternoon light. And I have a similar thing about light. So yes, I love describing nature. And some of that comes from my Oregon childhood, and some of that comes from art history background because I studied art history at university. That really informed my process of writing. I didn't take a single creative writing class, which is very unusual for most literary fiction authors. I only took one English literature course in uni that was about Henry James and William Faulkner. But if you think about it, that's very little English literature that I got. However, I took so many art history courses and they taught me exactly how to write. In contrast to maybe creative writing courses where they may teach you to try to do something different, come up with a new way to describe the sea that no one's ever thought of before, turn that noun into a verb. In art history, what they teach you is that the best kind of writing describes as precisely as possible what you see in your mind's eye so that the reader can visualize what you see. And that is all there is to it. So some of that is environmental description. And it even informs the way I describe how somebody might pick up a glass of water or sit down. It all has to connect in a way that's logical and precise. When you get to that precision, that is what creates the beauty. Because when I'm trying to find a way, the color of the sea, for example, I'm not trying to be brilliant. I'm just trying to find the most precise way that I see it.
Another recurring motif in this book is Giselle, the ballet Giselle, really about dying for love.
Absolutely. And I actually think of this book as Giselle as the meta motif for City of Nightbirds. You can read this book as Giselle without being a literal tribute.
Yeah, it's absolutely extraordinary. We're running out of time, but two things I need to ask you. Firstly, your first book is being made into a television series.
Yes, it is. And should I go on?
Tell us more.
You know, I get asked this at every interview, and all I can say about this without the official press conference happening is that some of the biggest K-drama and K-pop stars will be starring in it, so it'll be very exciting for people. And they are very passionate about this for the opportunity to portray this incredible moment in Korean history in its most beautiful visual and musical representation. So I'm involved in the casting. I'm involved in what the sounds and the visual cinematography will be like.
So exciting. And somehow, on top of that, you've written another book, A Love Story from the End of the World.
That will be published in both the UK and the US on November 25th, 2025.
I cannot wait.
Oh, thank you, Georgina.
Juhea Kim, thank you so much for speaking to me. City of Nightbirds is published by One World and it's out now. You've been listening to Meet the Writers, thanks to the production team of Steph Chungu, Francesca Gilks and Mariella Bevan. And you can download this show and previous episodes from our website or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Georgina Godwin. Thank you for listening.